Good afternoon. My name is Heather Greenwood Davis, and I have a confession to make. For almost 2 years, I've been living a lie. I've been telling people that I'm a travel writer, and we all know that can't be true, right? I mean, like most of you, I've been grounded for much of the past 2 years, and the most travel I've done has been from my office to my kitchen. What I've been is a home writer. Well, at least until a few weeks ago. This is me, and in early September, after more than 18 months of finding ways to spend my time that did not annoy my family and that kept us all safe, I boarded an international flight. My last international flight before that was in February 2020. Saying that a lot has changed during that time would be the kind of trite understatement people make, with a nod and a wink, when they know that the audience, like themselves, have been through what felt like the end of the world and are nervously hoping that it's all behind them. So let me say this, a lot has changed since then. Travel has gone from something we could do on a whim, a spontaneous break from the everyday, to something that requires meticulous planning and forethought. Everything from where we'll go, to who we'll see, to what we'll do, to who we'll bring, to where we'll eat is harder. And getting there, especially by plane, the part of the trip that was already a stressor for so many, well, that's harder too. The flights that took me to Switzerland were my first international ones, but they weren't my first pandemic flights. My first flights were in late August. That was the 5-hour flight I took to where you are, British Columbia. I flew with my 16-year-old son, Cameron, to Vancouver and then on to Victoria. And then my husband and my 19-year-old son, Ethan, joined us in Port Hardy. From there, we grabbed a car, we took a ferry, and we drove our way back to Vancouver. It was phenomenal. Together, we managed the new rules, we had epic adventures, and we risked looking strange at times to make sure that we and the people around us could stay safe. That first flight, something that was once so routine in my life, was one of the most nerve-wracking ordeals I've experienced in a long time. I don't know how many of you have been on planes recently, but it is eerily quiet on board, a combination probably of people's nerves, the facial masks, everybody's having trouble making conversation, and it can feel excruciatingly long, despite your attempts to watch TV or to listen to the music. In fact, I finally understood why there are so many meditation podcasts available on the in-flight system. I used a few of them, and their related breathing techniques in the air that day kept me safe and sane. And I'm basically a professional flyer. I can imagine how stressful it would be for someone whose flights were few and far between pre-pandemic. But here's the thing. Travel is a muscle, and experience is like weightlifting. The more you do it, the stronger you are. By the time I took the Swiss Air flight to Zurich in early September, I was a bit calmer. I had a better idea of what to expect. I knew what lines might be like at the airport, and that the inevitable person wearing their mask as a chin strap would probably be seated a few aisles ahead of me and be very bad at putting it over their nose and mouth. But I also knew that I could only control what I could control, which was me and my behavior. The lessons I learned on each flight informed the next one. The days I spent in Victoria navigating mask rules that were at the time very different than the ones I had at home in Ontario helped me make informed choices for my time in Geneva. Each experience made me stronger and more confident in travel and the reasons why travel matters. And the learning actually started even earlier than that. It goes without saying, the last 2 years have been very hard on all of us, from lockdowns to lost lives. None of it should be glossed over. But much like the lessons I took from my recent flights, there were also lessons to be had over the course of the last 2 years. And I believe that they can help us all be better travelers and, frankly, better humans. And because I am a travel writer, not a home writer, I have no choice but to share what I've learned. So I hope you'll indulge me as I take you through a few of those today. My goal is really simple. I want to offer some food for thought as you work to make this industry better and more receptive to the travelers who are itching but nervous to get back out there. Before we jump in, let me add one more thing. I don't know if there's a new normal or if we're working back to the old one, but there are definitely new protocols, new opportunities, and new lessons afoot. And whether we're open to them or fighting them every step of the way, they exist. And it would be silly, dangerous, and detrimental to ignore them. So here we go. 3 things you need to think about as we move forward as a travel industry in 2021. The first one, people want to travel. If you have tried to book a cottage or a rental car this summer, you already know travel is back. People are throwing open their lockdown doors and bolting for places near and near. While it's true that international travel is opening up, for most people, travel still looks very domestic. They are boarding planes and trains, but mostly hopping in the family car or RV, and they're searching for new spaces and places to explore, but safely. For the industry, that's a good thing. There's also another pandemic-related change. Work-life balance is being sought more than ever. Companies who thought they'd never allow an employee to work from home suddenly had no choice. And as a result, may have discovered some of the pros, working in your pajamas, and some of the cons, sleeping where you work, of a work from anywhere lifestyle. Now, as people begin to contemplate a post-pandemic return to work, companies and HR departments are working out the details of what that might look like. Some people will return to the offices and the cubicles. Maybe they'll be on rotating schedules. Some will continue to work from home full-time. Others will ditch crowded city living for rural or international options after realizing how important being closer to the people they really care about is. All of these options offer an opportunity for the travel industry. And we saw it happen already, right? Caribbean islands offered work visas and much more. We saw people swap small apartments for beachfront villas. We saw first trips once lockdowns were lifted were where? To see far-flung family members, right? The people they'd missed the most. Families whose children were no longer tied to in-class learning found flexibility in where they learned, and were better able to tie that learning to spaces and places, whether that was a cottage or a vacation home or an RV, that allowed for play when class time was over. The recognition that time is finite is strong, and more than ever, time feels borrowed. People aren't going to give up these things easily when the pandemic is over. They're going to continue to look for ways to forge those bonds, to make better memories, and to travel. And travel is perfectly poised to help them find the ways to do it. From buy now, travel later packages to insurance coverage with COVID-19 considerations, the industry can and must support what travel looks like now. Not what we want it to be, but what it is. Number 2, travel is harder. It is more expensive and more complicated than ever before. And travelers will think longer and be more considerate about how, where, why, and when they travel. For a few months this summer, flights were cheap. Canadian travel, which is notoriously expensive, was suddenly a bargain. And by early fall, it felt like everyone I knew was headed somewhere, a lot of them to British Columbia. But that blip in fare prices is over. Now travel costs are on the rise again. And it's not just the flights. I was recently quoted a price for a 1-week car rental in British Columbia that was close to $10,000. And that was lucky because most people are struggling to even find a car. Across the industry, worldwide, staff shortages are having a huge impact on what's open, how many rooms are available at hotels, and what service is offered. It's the perfect storm. Just as travelers are ready to return, the industry lacks the trained personnel to greet them properly. And one bad stay could stymie our collective travel future. International travel isn't exempt, and in some ways is even more difficult. Americans and other internationals visiting Canada need to factor in the cost of tests in order to enter, and they need to think about the time they'll need to get those tests. While I was in Switzerland, the on-the-ground rules changed while I was there. As a travel writer, I had the support of the tourism board there to help me navigate vaccination passports that I couldn't access, testing obligations that felt onerous. But independent travelers would have been on their own to figure out which test they need, where to get it, how much it will cost, when it would expire, and so on. Our job has to be to cut the difficulty. We have to continue to inform, for sure, in very succinct and specific ways, and we'll have to increase the amount of correspondence and interaction we have with travelers. It's no longer going to be enough to just welcome them over or encourage them to go. We need to hold hands for this, and we need to shepherd people as much as we can, or we risk that they'll see the difficulty, throw their hands up, and frankly, go back home. Number 3, travelers have changed. When the world fully opens up again, and it will, we're all going to be navigating some pretty unfamiliar terrain. And what many of us have already realized is that the pandemic has affected us physically, mentally, and emotionally. We will make changes for years, possibly lifetimes to come, as a result of what we've endured, lost, and gained. The time in my life that comes closest to what I'm feeling now is really a trip I took with my own family in 2011. For 1 year, we traveled nonstop around the world. We popped into 29 countries on 6 continents. It was incredible. We hung out with strangers who would become friends. We got lost in foreign cities. And, we were truly, truly exploring. And it was, as it turns out, the adventure of a lifetime. When we returned to Canada, we were changed. Forever changed. What we valued had changed. What we wanted from our lives had changed. We had seen how easy it was to live with less, and we were more focused on experiences than things. Those changes, for the most part, they've stuck. When your travelers return, they're going to be new people too. Understanding that they will be looking to find real connections through travel, will be focused on the safety that it will allow those connections to happen, and that they'll be carrying a level of stress that is both unusual and increasingly familiar. That's going to go a long way in helping their return and in helping you guide them to and through a real vacation. That's also going to include, in part, taking a hard look at what you have to offer and what the stories are that you've told in the past and the ones that you will tell in the future. We've spent part of the last year looking at our flaws as a community, as a country, race and treatment of Indigenous people, Asian hate, Black Lives Matter. And for many of us, continuing that learning will rely in part on our travel support. The pandemic waves have become second nature to most of us. Wearing a mask into the bank no longer feels like an invitation for an interview with a security guard. And shaking hands feels like it might go the way of the dodo bird. The protests have slowed too. The streets have emptied. Many of the placards are down. The news stations seem to have moved on. The eye of the storm, as it were, has passed. But what we are left with is an opportunity. As we look around and survey the damage, as we try to pick up the pieces to move forward, we will each need to decide whether we're planning to restore or to renovate. Today, I want to encourage you to choose renovation, to opt to take this time and this time that we've had together where we were learning as an opportunity to build back better, to build back different. It's time, I think, that we got humble. The fact is, you don't know what you don't know. And what we don't know here in Canada when it comes to issues around race, ability, and inclusion is a lot. That mosaic versus melting pot mantra that we grew up with is a myth. The mosaic is fractured, and many of us haven't taken the time to look beyond our own pieces. I was born in this country, and I was in my 40s when I learned that Canada still had its own slaves at the time it was playing hero to American ones. I was in my 40s when I stepped onto the land of a residential school for the first time and heard from an Indigenous person about the atrocities that happened here in my country. I was in my 40s when I learned about the tragic rejection of the refugees aboard the Komagata Maru and the South Asian lives that were lost as a result. I'm in my 40s now. We as an industry, we have no choice but to be better and do better at telling all of the stories. Travelers are going to be looking for them, and believe me, they will be judging you if they can't be found. Before I leave you today, I want to make one last thing very clear. And I hope what I'm about to say filters through everything else and sticks with you at the end of the day. I hope it not only sticks with you, I hope it ripples through the industry and makes its way to the minds of every traveler we encounter. Are you ready? Travel is worth it. Yeah. Despite the hassles, despite the hardships, despite the stressors, despite the rules. How do I know this? Because I'm telling you it's worth it, even though I have made this face. On my trip to Switzerland and Denmark, that trip lasted 15 days. And over that time, I subjected my nasal passage to 8 probing test sticks, each one trying harder than the last to tickle the nether regions of my brain, or at least that's what it felt like. But because I did that and suffered through that, I got to do all of this. On this trip, I met people from around the world. I learned how to navigate the New World Order and the ArriveCAN app. I know the various probes I might encounter at a rapid versus a PCR testing center, and I know the personalities I might encounter there as well. I also know the taste of a Danish hot dog shared with my husband, what a chasselas looks and tastes like while looking at its Swiss vineyards, the beauty of a Corbusier design, and the way mountains glow in just the right light. I learned the hard parts of travel, the new hard parts of travel, by doing them. And I'm convinced that no amount of reading and prepping could have done that. These are experiences that have to be lived and have to be encouraged to be lived. I made that face, and still I'd do it again. Maybe not tomorrow. A girl needs time to recover, but one day soon. I do it because to do it is to live, to meet new people, to try new things, to marvel, to smile, to reflect on how close we came to losing it all, to inhale and exhale, to eat gelato. That is why Travel 2.0 is guaranteed. That feeling is what the people who are fighting to get back to your doorstep are after. And as long as you help them navigate the safest path to your door, they and I will be back. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I so appreciate being here. Thanks for having me.